Welcome to Babblecom 5. This is episode 7 of season 5 of Babylon 5, Secrets of the Soul. Franklin is getting into his new role of cataloguing the smaller new arrivals to the station, viri and bacteria. Right now he's interested in the Pakmara, as they seem remarkably resilient to infections from other races, given that their nature as carrion eaters leads them to digest various sources of material. Pakmara are chosen of God apparently, can eat anything, as long as it isn't fish. Unfortunately for Franklin, it turns out barium solutions really aren't on the approved list either, as the contents of the beaker are rapidly regurgitated onto a medlab window. Other new arrivals include more telepaths, which Zack is less than happy about, as they lack money and paperwork. Byron arrives to collect the new arrivals, likening them to angels on a pinhead. One who has speaking difficulties is called Peter. It turns out his abilities lie elsewhere. He is a telekinetic, a very rare talent for a telepath. Zack is trying to engage with Lita, but as we have all observed to this point, and as she now makes clear, she justifiably feels used with no reward by those normals around her for whom she has risked her life on numerous occasions. Byron is someone she can believe in, who believes that telepaths deserve better. She would follow him into hell. What can Zack say in 5 minutes that would change that? The short answer, of course, is nothing. She recognises his jealousy too, but doesn't scan him. He is left frustrated. Byron and his followers are challenged as they try and pass peacefully through down below. As the challenge turns physical, Byron invites 3 punches from the ringleader. He then asks him if 1 was the same as 3. If 3 was the same as 1 and 2, would 4, 5 and 6 be any different? The man has no answer, and Byron tells him he will not find an answer to his anger with him. The telepaths move on. Franklin is meeting with the Hayek ambassador and Kirin, a younger aide. They are a gerontocracy, valuing the wisdom of their elders to guide them. They do not normally share their medical information, and Kirin presses Franklin hard on whether he would give their information up if his life was threatened. He says that technical safeguards notwithstanding, he would die rather than have his research used for biogenetic weaponization. Satisfied, they agree to have the information with him shortly. However, after he is left, Kirin asks what will happen if he finds out. The ambassador says that this is the risk they take to remain in the alliance. Kirin says he will die if he betrays them. Lita tends to Byron's injuries, even though he prefers to be left alone at these times. She would have chosen a more confrontational course of action herself, but he says there would have been more of them injured, not just him. He says that the ways of mundanes and Psychor in using violence do not build governance that lasts. He believes they must break away from that approach in order to form a long-lasting society. She is exasperated by him, yet clearly also besotted, as he is with her, and they kiss, but she never stays with the group overnight. He wants that to change and takes her outside his quarters to ask the others if they feel she belongs, and she is greeted with hugs and smiles from all. Franklin feels the Hayek are holding back on their records, having given him only a few hundred years worth of data when their civilization is thousands of years old. Kirin offers him nothing more than what she has been given. After she leaves, the computer confirms they have no cultural information going back before 800 years ago, which leads him to conclude they're hiding something, but what and why? Peter is buying food with other telepaths but is separated going into a transport tube. He takes an empty one but is disoriented when he steps out, wandering through down below. He runs into the group who harassed Byron and the others earlier, and they try to take his goods, throwing him to the ground. He uses his talent to throw objects at them, but not enough to stop them, and is badly beaten as a result. As Byron and Lita arrive in Medlab, he is being treated for trauma, but will survive. Unfortunately, the other telepaths are seeing what Byron is seeing, and they are not as non-violent as he is, pursuing a man and making him believe he is on fire. Byron reaches out to them to break off the attack, and they do so, the man passing out as Byron checks him, just as Zack arrives and pulls a PPG on Byron. Lita calms the situation, but Zack will investigate further and takes Byron away. Franklin continues to investigate the Hayek mystery. He asks the computer to look at alien resources, as many other species have had longer-term contact with them. Byron asks to see his people, but remains incarcerated, getting flashes of violence being done to the man who assaulted him, and then Peter. He is anguished by what is happening, but can do nothing to prevent it. The computer produces a Drazi record that refers to Hayek Till. One asks to be taken with the Drazi, but they refuse per their contract and notify the collectors. Seizing on this thread, Franklin has the computer search for references to Hayek Till and produce hard copy. On his way out of MedLab, he is accosted by an armed Kirin because she knows he's found out the truth, that two races evolved in parallel on the Hayek homeworld, which Kirin confirms. But the Hayek ultimately wiped out the Hayek Till, despite having once interbred with them. As the ambassador continues, this atrocity was not perpetrated by their generation, but they keep the secret, which Franklin cannot forgive them for. There is more, however. Kirin is ordered to give him his papers back, and on being guided to their population growth figures, he sees the opposite is the case. Their birth rates are well down. Interbreeding with the Hayek Till might have become a crime, but it was in fact necessary for both species to succeed. Without them, the Hayek have doomed themselves as a race. Keeping the secret will mean their death, because Franklin cannot find a cure for whatever they now lack by himself, certainly not in his lifetime. Their elders have decided that now that an outsider has found the truth, there is nothing more to be gained from keeping the secret, and everything to be gained from seeking help from other worlds to try and find a solution. Byron is cut loose, the man he tried to help remembering that he did so. Yet the other man is dead, which of course he can know nothing about, as Zack had him in the brig while it was happening. Yet Byron does say that had he let him speak to his people, there might now be one less body in the morgue. He hopes Zack will remember that. Back in their quarters, Byron berates himself for not having taught his people better. He doesn't know who did the killing, but he could feel it happening levels away, and he feels shame. Lita comforts him, saying there was nothing more he could have done, that he's helped them all so much, herself included. She offers herself to him as his willow, recalling the tale he told her last episode. As she undresses, she cautions him that she's been changed by the Vorlons, and that as they make love and their barriers come down, she doesn't know what will happen to him. She may burn him. He acknowledges the risk, and as their passion grows, her eyes become black, and the other telepaths stir from their sleep as images of her Vorlon encounters are broadcast. Then something more. Images of her in a tank with Vorlons and encounter suits watching over, and beside her, fetuses, and further on more fully grown humanoids. Afterwards, Byron is angry, not with her, but because what he had thought was a quirk of fate was actually the Vorlons interfering on 100 worlds to create telepaths as cannon fodder for their conflict with the Shadows. Lita tells him that the Vorlons are gone, but he argues that the Alliance owes them a place to be with their own kind now the Shadow War is over, that they would not exist and could have had normal lives but for that war, and he resolves that if the Alliance will not give them such a place, they will force them to. One detail I drew from this episode that for some reason hadn't stuck with me until now, perhaps because we haven't seen that much of him outside of MedLab with his medical gown on, is that Franklin isn't in Earth Force uniform. He's still in his Army of Light uniform. So although he's clearly reporting to Lockley, he, like Corwin perhaps, is retaining a degree of separation from Earth Force. I don't think we've seen Lockley comment on this yet, but I wonder if at some point she'll try and reinstate Earth Force norms in this respect on the station. Clearly there's a certain new normal that's perhaps not been figured out yet. So once again, we have a very telepath-focused episode, and I know that Byron is quite a divisive figure. I think I'm warming to him a touch this time round, and yet his turnaround at the end of this episode seems a little out of character given his normal turn-the-other-cheek pacifism. That being said, it's apparent that his worldview has very much been tipped on its head, and it's also very interesting that he sees their telepathy as a curse as much as a blessing, because it's made them the focus of so much fear and hate, leaving them unable to live normal lives. So now he's more determined than ever to get a real homeworld for his people as payment, in a sense, for the fact that they exist at all. I'm not quite sure if the revelation from Lita's memory breaks previously established canon or not. Byron seems to suggest that but for the Vorlons there'd be no telepaths at all, but I suspect that probably isn't the case. After all, what they did to Lita was an enhancement of pre-existing abilities, and many telepaths are born naturally to other telepaths. I guess it is, however, possible that telepaths were indeed initially seeded on certain worlds with a certain level of power to give the Vorlons options down the line. There seemed to be a number of mature telepaths in the Vorlon holding area even at the time Lita was being altered. So there's a definite question mark there. While I'm thinking about it, there are just a few frames where we see what could be Naranek and Ulkesh's encounter suits reflected in Lita's tank, both perhaps involved with her adaptations. I'm not sure on whether Talia would have been the recipient of these upgrades had her story not been stopped dead, but I think Lita is the better character to have gotten them because she's not as hardcore Psy-core. Also very interesting to see Peter's character here, because I can't immediately think of anyone outside of Talia via Jason Ironheart a touch, and perhaps the Vorlons themselves who exhibited out-and-out telekinesis. I actually wonder what would have happened if he'd been on board when Bester arrived. He would have loved to get his hands on him. I'm not entirely sure what the point of the Hayek element of the story was. I actually had to look up their species, as while they've been around a long time, I'm not sure we've ever talked to them before now. It was an interesting side plot, yes, to a point, but unusually it didn't really intersect with the main plot. I actually found Franklin surprisingly unforgiving of the modern Hayek, in fairness to them, although having a gun in his face might have warped his objectivity somewhat. I was reminded by a comment elsewhere that in Season 1 Londo mentions that there was parallel evolution on Centauri Prime too, but they were even less polite about the situation than the Hayek. So it does make Franklin's reaction odd, because the situation is clearly not unheard of, it's just that it's happened in a modern setting. I guess the Shadows would have looked favourably at it. Also interesting that nothing more was said about Peter's exhibition of telekinetic powers in Medlab. Given what we know, it would be incredibly rare to see a telekinetic, but I guess we didn't see any discussion from Franklin because Byron had to get moving with Lita. Presumably he'll recover and could be an important player if Byron does feel the need to put pressure on at some point. Now, believe it or not, this is the first time we've had full-on tutti frutti happening on film during the series run. Tame by today's standards, I know, but well handled, I thought, and of course interspersed with the mental voyeurism involved in Lita virtually broadcasting herself to all the other telepaths present giving her upgrades. Perhaps not the most discreet place to have had their first intimate moments together. Even so, it was also totally in keeping from what we'd already learned some time ago from Talia about what happens when telepaths make love. Their souls intertwine in a way that normals never could, which is undoubtedly in part why the episode is named as it is. So we seem to have reached something of a tipping point with Lita's revelations as the telepath colony grows. Now Byron has a new agenda to push with fire in his belly, and you wonder whether at some point Lita was going to have to make a call between her old associates and her new lover. See you next time.